So just to introduce ourselves, so my name's Zoe and I'm the head of content at Language Nut, and my colleague Elaine has been teaching for about as long as I've been alive.
Thank you for that, Zoe.
Which is amazing. So she's got an absolute wealth of knowledge, and she's actually she initiated and established an accreditation process for newly qualified teachers. So she has trained NQTs, and I think what's really nice is we have kind of two ends of the spectrum. So Elaine has got so much experience and so much knowledge that it's just been great to share with you. And then for my part, it was more recent that I was an NQT. So yeah, we've got two quite different experiences, which hopefully we'll be able to share lots of things with you. So this is our session, MFL SOS for NQTs or newly qualified teachers. So full of practical tips. We'll be looking at how you can, different challenges you might be facing as an NQT, both during lockdown and normally. So these are the different areas that we're going to be looking at. First of all, the step up from the trainee year. It is a big step up. Your teaching load will go up, as you know, and there are many more responsibilities you have. Behaviour management, setting targets. Behaviour management was probably about 80% of my challenges as an NQT, and I think lots of people feel the same. So we're looking at lots of techniques, both for lockdown and in the classroom. Forming relationships with and motivating your students, which links to behaviour management, of course, because that is one way to make behaviour management easier. Time management is a big one, so again linked to the step up from the trainee year. How do you get your weekends back? And then finally getting through this year and remaining healthy. So before I hand over to Elaine to talk about the step up from the trainee year, I would just like to say that we're trying to focus as much as possible. We have so many tips to fit in, but specifically on things that might be useful for you as new teachers or trainees. And some of these might be things for the classroom, some of these might be things for lockdown. We do have a special webinar just dedicated to social distance learning and lockdown learning. We did this a few weeks ago, and the video is available on the Language Nut website if you'd like to check that out. So those tips are actually for everybody. So we haven't focused as much on those because we have a video with those tips in them. This is more specifically for new teachers, and so there may be some classroom techniques which you're not necessarily able to put into practice right now, what we think are really, really useful for you as new teachers. It's certainly things that I found personally useful, and I'm sure Elaine did as well. So I'm going to hand over to Elaine, and here we go.
Okay, thank you, Zoe. So obviously the tips that we're going to be looking at tonight, hopefully you may need to tweak to fit into your school context. And obviously we're not going to say you have to do this, you have to do that. This is all about considerations that we think about which may well be useful for you in your situation. Whether you are in your first year of teaching, whether you are in your second or third year of teaching, if you're recently qualified, in whichever country you are, or setting, primary or secondary or independent or state. And also, if you are a trainee, whether you are with School Direct, doing a PGC through a local college or university, whether you're with Teach First, you're doing assessment route only, or whether you are with a SCIT, with a teaching school, hopefully you'll find some of the tips and ideas tonight that may well fit with your situation. And if not, you can tweak them. As Zoe said, I've mentored many NQTs and trainees over my years, probably well over 1,000 in the last 30 odd years I've taught, and more recently a lot more because I was looking after 11 different education authorities for a large academy chain, and we actually had to form our own accreditation board, which I had to take on and head up. So it's really important that you have your entitlement to your well-structured and supportive induction programme, which is hopefully in your school or within your LEA or within your teaching school. Obviously, it needs to make sure that you are meeting your teacher standards throughout the time that you are going to be either full-time in your teaching or part-time. And obviously, if you are part-time, you may well have to train, you may have to spend longer doing your induction than if you were full-time. It's really important that you stay a self-reflective and evaluative practitioner, and obviously everything that you do in your lessons, particularly in lockdown, you'll find that you will probably be reviewing it and thinking, oh, I could have done that better, how could I have improved that? And that's just normally part of your journey that you will find that you will move on through your teaching career. Your development targets, which you will have come with from your training year, or if you are in your training year, you will be at the end of this year or the time that you are doing your training, if it's over more than 1 year, you will have some development targets, and they've come under different headings in the past. They've come under career entry profile targets, just development targets, professional targets, or moving forward with the new type of things that are coming in line from this year, things like the early career framework, which is going to be what you're going to be working on. And obviously you probably have 2 or 3 of these targets, some have more, and they will change throughout the time that you are a newly qualified teacher. Important, however, to make sure that you are focusing on those targets as you move into your first term, because those are the things that whoever wrote your report following your induction year will be saying that you need to improve on. It's really on the right hand side, I've put something which is key when you start a new job, is to have your key contacts there, so that if any of the development targets are related to anything, whether it be AAL, whether it be to do with special needs, or whether it to do with health and safety or any ICT support, you know then who to contact to get the best and maximum support you can to ensure that you meet your development target as much as possible. But also when you start your first job, even if you're a trainee, it's really important to know who the key contacts in school are, so that you can then, if you have something that you need to follow on, or somebody that you need to contact, you know them. And having a form like that where you know exactly who the person is and where the contact details are, whether that be a phone number, whether that be an email address, even if it's a room where you need to go to be able to quickly access that, and you can just get that contact and get that actual problem sorted or that issue dealt with. The next thing that's really important in your step up from your trainee year are your deadlines. And basically you will need to know when you start in a school, in whatever capacity that is, what are the deadlines for your reports, for your first assessment, for your second and third assessment, or if you are part-time, it will be maybe over a longer term into year 2 or year 3. Also, what are the meetings that you have with your mentor or your head of department? You know, have you got something to do for that meeting? Have you got to have a particular report done or a particular piece of work that they've asked you to do? Also, thinking about your teaching commitment, what are the deadlines in terms of when a report's due, when are parents' evenings, when are assessment deadlines, when are exam deadlines? So it's basically really vital to have those deadlines mapped out either in an electronic diary or in your own diary if that's the way you work. People work in different ways. Having this on your wall also helps if you are, I know it's impossible at the moment with lockdown, but once you're back in school, having it somewhere that you can refer to and you know what you're working towards helps keep you organised and helps that step up from your trainee year to become a lot less stressed. Okay. One of the things that has always been a real big project for newly qualified teachers and anybody who's training is how you organise your evidence against the teachers' standards. And this was something when I was putting our documentation together a few years ago, and even going forward now, that I've always been really careful to keep as slick and as organised as possible. There are lots of different ways you can keep your evidence. You can do it electronically or you can do it in a folder, and I think if you've done your trainee year and you feel that you have got a way that works, you need to stick with that, because if the more comfortable you are with organising your evidence, the better chances are you will have it all in one place should you need it. You also need to make sure that you're as succinct as possible. So can you use one piece of evidence, for example, like a lesson observation or a work scrutiny report from your head of department or your line manager that will tick several teachers' standards? And if so, then use that. Making sure that you have things like emails or cards from students or any comments from any member of staff who's popped into your lesson to do a quick learning walk. Just ask them to give you a short email on what they've seen, whether it be positive or whether it be less than positive, so that you can then use that as something, maybe a target to work on, or you can use it against one of your development targets, or just for your teaching standards. There are lots of different types of evidence you can use. Screenshots of students' work is another thing which is useful. Keeping abreast of your developments in your subjects. And before I move on to that, I suddenly realised at the bottom here, this is a screenshot from a couple of, this is Teaching Standard 6, and this is a document I put into our handbook, which may be of use to you. And again, I've got these for all the teaching standards, so if you would like to have them after tonight's session, please do ask and I will send them to you. You can see here that the areas for discussion in the middle are some prompting questions, which may well be useful for you as an NQT to either ask yourself or to work alongside your mentor with. And again, in the training for mentors, we'll be exploring this area again. And then obviously the possible evidence is in the final column. On the right hand side, I've done a screenshot of how you can actually organise this. You could actually put the nature of your evidence, so that what kind of evidence that is, whether it be a lesson observation or a pupil voice, and then how does that meet the teacher's standards, and then date it. And that could then go alongside the evidence if you're keeping it in a folder, or you could use it as an evidence electronically if you're keeping that electronically. Keeping abreast of your developments in your subjects is very time consuming. So some top tips here is, if you are a language teacher, you could join your professional association, which is the Association for Language Teachers. They offer a low subscription for people who are in their NQT year and also people who are in their trainee year. But they also have, if you decide not to go down that road, you can also keep abreast of their developments by signing up for their weekly emails. Obviously, the exam boards are very important, and to be able to sign up again, whichever exam board you are interested in working with, you can sign up for their electronic emails and their updates as well. Obviously, you may well be aware of NSELP. They've got some fantastic resources on there, and they post things online as to what's going on in their area, and obviously lots of different Facebook groups. Again, you can get yourself involved in or become a member of, for example, MFL Matters, and there are lots of different ones that I've put on a final page of this presentation tonight, in case you were not aware of them. Avoiding burnout is also something I'm sure Zoe will address, because it's important to stay fresh. If you take on everything, the first thing you want to do when you go into a new school or a new setting is to try and take on lots of new things. You really need to be careful that you take on something which you know is well within your reach, which relates to the final bullet point: where can you have the most visible impact? What are you really interested in doing? You know, you could go for something that's in your comfort zone and then maybe think, well, I'll try this and I'll get involved in this because it just will give me that little bit of stretch out of my comfort zone. However, lots of NQTs that I've mentored have always gone with safety, and they've always gone with something. Well, I'm really interested in doing, I can think of an NQT recently who was really interested in films, and he set up his own film club for languages, and he just did that once a week, and he really enjoyed that, and he got quite a lot of students involved in that too, which, as Zoe said earlier, is really good for motivating your students. But the one person who is the most important person in your life is going to be your mentor for the next few months in your trainee or your NQT year. Okay, thank you, Zoe. So can move on to the next slide. So just to try and think if there's anything in the chat there, what would be your tip to a new teacher for the next academic year for managing the setup from your trainee year, from managing the step up from your trainee year? If you'd like to put something in the chat, because I think this would be interesting for other people to read. And also, it's all about sharing tonight. It's all about being able to take from what we are offering you and giving something back to other NQTs and trainees and recently qualified teachers who are with us. So just take a moment just to think of if there's anything that you feel, yes, I'm going to have a go at that from what I've mentioned here tonight, or something that's popped into your head that you've done recently, or something that someone has suggested to you that, you know, it would be a tip for the next academic year. And then with that, I'm then going to hand over to Zoe to start on the behaviour management and setting targets section. Thank you, Zoe.
Thanks very much, Elaine. Yeah, so periodically throughout this, we're going to be asking you, as Elaine said, to think about any tips. So either things that you have got from elsewhere you want to share, or anything from today, which is really helpful. We like to do what I call the Monday test, which is that any CPD we provide should have practical things that you could do on Monday or tomorrow or whatever with your classes straight away. We really want to keep it useful to you. So I'm going to be talking about behaviour management, and then Elaine will be feeling a little bit as well afterwards. So lots of tips here. Whiz through them as quickly as I can. So don't be afraid to ask for help. People actually do feel quite flattered to be asked. I know that teachers are very busy, but there are so many people that can help you do things, whether that's observations, whether that is tips about dealing with particular students, or any practical tips for teachers from, for example, other MFL colleagues, or actually from other subjects. So other NQTs can be helpful, because there are plenty of techniques which are useful across different subjects. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes it can be a question of asking if you've got, for example, if your mentor or your head of department, which may be the same person potentially, if they're maybe able to help you with a particular class, doing a little bit of team teaching potentially, or doing something. I had quite a few sort of key characters in one class which were making my life quite difficult, and for one lesson the head of department just took those 3 students out. I made sure I had planned the most fun lesson I could. It went really smoothly, and that just helped me get the rest of the class on side, because they could see that I plan really nice lessons. You know, it was certain individuals were preventing that learning from happening. A little bit of divide and conquer there. So and that made it much easier than in later lessons, because it wasn't the whole class against me, which it really can feel like sometimes. So don't be afraid to ask people for help. And observe where you can. We know that time is difficult. We know that it's quite difficult to do that if you're doing remote learning, but particularly once you can get back into school full time, if you can observe other teachers, please do. And if, where possible, make them other newly qualified or recently qualified teachers. So obviously it's great to see very experienced teachers as well, but if you're thinking about behaviour management, part of the problem with observing very experienced or senior teachers is that you see the effects of long-term behaviour management, but you don't see the techniques. So I remember going to see my head of department with a class, and she walked in and they were silent. And that didn't happen to me, but that was partly because she had the gravitas of being a head of department and being extremely experienced and having a lot of respect that she'd earned over time. Whereas when I went to see other NQTs, I could see behaviour management techniques in action, and they weren't having it quite as easy. So then I found that really useful. Be consistent as much as possible. So you will always have students who decide, who claim that you're picking on them, you don't like them. If you are consistent, then you can show that, and you can argue that you are not picking on anybody, because actually teachers don't. If you can maybe develop some kind of system which fits in with the school behaviour policy and stick to that, be as consistent as possible. There might be a kind of departmental or school policy you have to follow, but you can put your own spin on it. So for example, what I used to do was I would say, if you're talking over me or off task or whatever, I would say your name. And if I say your name twice, then your name goes on the board, and that means a negative point, because I would then fill in the negative points in the school system afterwards. If I say it again, then that's a detention. And if I say it a 5th time, you're removed from the class and I'm calling your parents. And I had that very, very consistent policy which fitted in with the school policy, but I was absolutely clear about this with my students, and they knew that, and they couldn't argue that I was picking on them or whatever, because I said, look, I had to say your name 5 times. So you know that's what that means. I'm not being easier or harder on anybody. That is my system. The next thing I want to talk about is techniques for getting the attention of a class. So this is more for when you're in the classroom. I know that some of you are still teaching in a classroom with key worker children, for example, and in this lockdown, there are more students in school anyway than there were previously, but these are techniques which will be useful for you for your whole teaching career. So you've probably been told this: project, don't shout, as much as possible. So particularly if you're a female teacher, it's quite difficult. If you shout, we can have a tendency to go shrill, which doesn't really have that authority. So whereas if you project, keep your voice at its normal pitch, and practice doing that from your diaphragm. So actually kind of musical techniques, if anyone does singing, using that to making sure that you're projecting, not shouting. Shouting can sound very desperate unless you are lucky enough to have a very, very booming voice. It can sound like you've lost it. And at that point, unless you are able to absolutely stun them into silence, once you've shouted, there's nowhere where you can really go from there. And so if the student then escalates, the whole thing, it just raises the tension. So if you can try to stay calm as much as possible. There's also the fact that lots of students who come from perhaps more difficult backgrounds, if they're used to being shouted at home, it's water for ducks back. It doesn't do anything to them. All it does is it just, maybe they get a rise out of you. They quite like that. So actually staying calm with them, being the adult in the room as much as possible, that helps everybody, and it helps keep the tension low. Don't talk over the class is a big thing, and it's so hard. And I have been there. I have stood there waiting for what felt like 6 hours while I'm waiting for them to be quiet, but it never works to keep talking over them. This is where lockdown teaching has actually got handy, because there's a mute button. What I wouldn't have given for a mute button in real life teaching, that would have been wonderful. So do use that in your lockdown teaching. But yeah, when you are in the classroom, wait for silence, even though it feels absolutely mortifying at the time. Try to use some kind of consistent technique. So when you're trying to get the attention of a class, so a countdown is quite a common one. You know, it might be with hand in the air, so you have a visual cue. You might have something that's different for lockdown teaching, especially if you've got students to sort of go away, mute themselves, do a task and come back. So whatever it is, make sure it's consistent. Observe other people, see what they have, and if you can do it in the target language, that's even better. So I would often do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 et silence, something like that. A little technique which somebody showed me, which I thought was really odd at the time, but it kind of worked, was the invisible column. And this is when you're waiting for the class to be quiet, and there's usually 1 or 2 little stragglers who are still talking. So as you're waiting there, you've done your countdown, you're waiting, and that person over there is talking. You imagine that there is an invisible column in front of you that you just have to lean to one side, and somehow that little lean, little cock of the head, death glare to that student, just really somehow focuses it. And I don't know why it works, but I found that it works. So just, you know, try it when you're next in the classroom. The invisible column, just, yeah, and you will over time perfect your death glare as a teacher. That is something that comes with time and practice. You will get there. And the final thing I had was a traffic light system. So this is something I did for a while, where I had a green, amber and red spot on my board, and they signified different levels of noise that were acceptable. So if it was green, that meant this is a speaking task. I'm expecting you to be talking at your normal volume with your partners, obviously on task. Amber is a kind of task where we're getting on with something, but I don't mind if you're whispering to the person next to you, if you're sort of asking them for help or something like that, or, you know, borrowing a pencil or whatever it is. So that's kind of quiet, very low level hubbub, but not too much. And then red is we're doing this in silence. So this might be exam conditions, a test or whatever. So absolute silent speaking. So that's kind of thing. And I found that actually moving from green and moving my arrow up to the red, or also silence, of course, to listen to me, that was just a visual cue that helped, meant I didn't have to do as much of the sort of projecting to get the attention of the class. Next, we're going to move on to techniques within a lesson. So again, lots of these are for when we're back fully in the classroom, because these are such useful techniques for new teachers. So when this is allowed, move around the classroom. I know this is a big challenge, and it's something we have addressed in our social distancing learning webinar, so please do check that out for more specific tips for remote teaching. But when you can, move around the classroom and be there, so that it's not a case of the people at the front have to be quiet and the people at the back can chat. Make sure you are all over that classroom and you know what is happening. A little thing about language is remove the word please from your vocabulary when you're speaking to students, and say thank you. So put that away, thank you, chewing gum in the bin, thanks, blazer on, thanks. It's please just somehow sounds a little bit desperate, and it sounds that you don't know whether they're going to do it or not. Thank you just sounds much more confident. It's still polite, still you're not barking orders at them, but thanks kind of suggests, yeah, obviously you're going to do this, and that expectation, not always, it won't always work, but a lot of the time that expectation, the students kind of go along with that before they really had time to think about it. The next technique is one I like to call the Eye of Sauron, and I use this to great effect sometimes. So try to cultivate the idea that you are all seeing and you know everything that's going on in the classroom. What I would do is I would walk, as I was walking around the classroom and looking at students' work and things, if I spotted a student doing something, they've got their phone or whatever, I wouldn't do it straight away. I would go to the front of the class, say, to pretend I was doing something on the board, turn my back to them, and then say, turn your phone off, Ben, or whatever that thing is. And at that point, they were looking at each other saying, how does she know? How does she see that? She had her back to us. And they feel like they somehow, you know what is going on in the classroom everywhere. So yeah, that's a little tip. Where this is possibly sounds a little contradictory, but you know, you can kind of pick your battles. Praise in public as much as possible, and then rebuke in private. So obviously little things like small corrections, like put your phone away, whatever, that's fine. But if you, for example, have a student who hasn't done their homework, or you need to have a bit of a talking to with them, then try to do that quietly as much as possible. If you can, take them out of the classroom, or just while students are getting on with something, go up to them when this is possible in the classroom, kneel down next to them and speak to them. During remote learning, you might be able to like take them into a breakout room, or just send them a message privately to talk to them afterwards, or send them an email. Don't feed attention, and don't feed bad behaviour with attention if it is attention-seeking behaviour, because that can sort of lure them into a bit of a confrontation in front of the class where they can't back down because they don't want to lose face in front of their friends. So try to take out of it. Lots of praise in public, and any difficult conversations, keep them private. And then the last technique I had, this is something I did with some of my really difficult classes, and I found it worked really well, is I had a very brief sort of skeleton lesson plan on the board of what I was the main tasks we were going to get through. Just on bullet points, and I made sure that all the fun stuff was at the end. So I put the games, or you know, the bits that I knew they kind of wanted to do, I put them at the end. And as we went through, I ticked them off, and they could see that when they held the lesson up, because I was having to wait for quiet in order to get my instructions out, or they were just chatting, then they could see that it was the bit at the end we weren't going to get to. And I actually then found you had some students go, oh, shut up, you know, we want to do this. Maybe it was using digital software or playing some kind of fun game. So that's something I found that really helped. So they could see that I was trying to put fun stuff into their lessons, and it wasn't my fault if we weren't getting through it in time. Next thing is about using reward and praise as much as possible. So praise is much more effective than punishment. For most humans, it's kind of basic psychological fact, really. Of course, you know, sometimes we do need to make sure there are consequences and we follow up on things, but praise and rewards actually are really effective. And they can, so if you have a system of house points or credits or whatever, make sure that you use that as much as you can. Be quite generous with them. Obviously, don't, you know, hand them out like sweeties, but anytime you can catch them doing something good, make sure you do that. And this is really useful, again, when you have the students who will claim that you're picking on them or whatever. I remember having a meeting with the parents, again in my NQT year, because their child was misbehaving in my lesson quite a lot, and I had to give them quite a lot of detentions. And the mother said, well, you know, she's given my son way more negative points and detentions than any other teacher. And then when we looked at the system, we could see that I had also given him more positive points, more house points than any other teacher had as well. So you can see I wasn't picking on him. I was actually just using the school system, the school behaviour system, a lot more. So that actually really helped my case. One thing you could do when you're in the classroom as a physical thing with house points or credits or whatever, this also helps not to break the flow, is I used to have little bits of paper, tiny little scraps of, you know, cut up scrap paper. And if I wanted to give someone a house point, I would just put that on the desk in front of them as I was walking around. So it meant I didn't have to interrupt my flow in order to give out house points and things. They would put their name or initials or whatever on it and give it to me at the end of the lesson. And I did sometimes use coloured paper in order to make sure that they didn't make their own. So I don't think it really happened very much. And then what I would do is I would put them all into a pot, one for each class, and at the end of the term I would draw one out and the winner would get a prize. So obviously the better they were behaving and the more house points they got, the more chance they had of winning the prize at the end. And it was quite a practical way to give out house points as well, and to log and remember who I'd given them to. So that's something I found really useful. Another thing you could do is to have some sort of system where they can earn treats. So with some difficult classes where they were very chatty and I was struggling to get them to be quiet, I made a deal with them that every time they were quiet straight away, once I had done my countdown, I would put a tally on the board. And when they got to 10, it would be a running tally between lessons. Once they got to 10, then the next lesson would be a treat lesson. So we would go into the computers, or we would maybe watch a video as part of it, or look at a song or something. But I would make sure something really nice was in the next lesson. And that was really helpful, because if they then spoke over me and I had to wait more than a second or two, then I would rub off a tally. So they would get really annoyed, because they knew that they were then further from getting their treats. So that really helped to kind of motivate them. And final tip for that is using music, if that's appropriate. Again, this is more of a classroom thing. So students actually like to listen, most students like to listen to music. Lots of them are used to having music on in the background as they're working. So what I would do is, if they were getting on with the task sort of fairly quietly, I would have music in the background. So Bayern 3 is a good radio station for German, and Energie for French, because it has a mixture of French, German and English music as well. So they quite like it, and it's quite modern. And I would have it quite quietly in the background. So if they were talking and it was getting too loud, they couldn't hear it, and I would refuse to put the volume up. I'd say the volume is broken, can't go up any higher. So that was a kind of motivating way to keep the noise down, because then they could hear the music, and it gave it just a very pleasant vibe. If people were misbehaving or abusing it, then I would turn it off, and that was that. So I found that music was just a very nice way to have something for them to look forward to. And my final tip, as I said, we've got loads to get through today, is to make yourself part of the school where possible. Obviously, avoid burnout, as Elaine was talking about before. But I find that the sooner that you can establish yourself as somebody who's part of the furniture and not just the new teacher, the easier that gets for you with behaviour management. So if there are things that you can help with, if you're a musical person, you can maybe be involved in school plays and concerts when they come back. Or just getting out and about when you're doing your break duty, going around and talking to people in the playground. Don't just stand there with your coffee, but actually chat to people and start to form those relationships. Elaine will go into this a little bit more later. Use bus duty, and just try to have some interactions with students where you're not trying to get grammar down their throat, which might be something they don't want to happen. So have positive interactions where you're talking about things that aren't to do with your subject. I found that actually when I took on a PSHE class, which was something that's timetabled to me, that massively improved my relationship with that year group, because I was doing year 9. Because we had a really nice lesson talking about body image and various kind of things that they were really interested in. So then they could see that I wasn't just this woman who was really obsessed with French and was trying to teach them French. So yeah, try to make yourself part of the school. Elaine has some more tips as well, so I'm going to pass over to her now.
Thank you, Zoe. I've just been thank you, Zoe. I've just been handing some things over to the chat there. There's a couple of questions. We are recording this, so if you do have to leave early, please be aware that it will be uploaded in the next sort of 2 days on the Language Note website if you have to leave. So as Zoe said, it's kind of like a reiteration of slightly different, sort of a few ideas extra, but being really positive. It's really important to catch students being good rather than being bad or naughty, whatever you want to do. Catching them in really rather than catching them out. If you can do that, is great. And if you can sort of diffuse the situation, almost catch them before they fall. If you can see something is brewing, then try and sort of diffuse that in the lesson if possible, using some of the techniques that Zoe said, whereby, if you can see somebody's got a phone out, go to the front, turn your back and say, Ben, can you put your phone away? That sort of kind of like, oh, I better do that before I start, getting into bother. It does really help that way. One thing I've always found is really been powerful is to never bear a grudge over from one lesson to the next. Always see every lesson as a new start, and that way you can find that your students, because as Zoe said, they're not used to, in some schools, students might have a very not a very pleasant home life, and therefore when they get home on a night, they might have had an argument with mum in the morning or dad or whoever's at home, and that kind of carries on into the evening. Well, if that kind of carries on from lesson to lesson, they're not not actually getting a break from that. So being, you know, when you see your students, even if it's the worst student that anybody would want in the classroom, and I'm sure we can all think of someone in our careers or in when we were at school, or even nowadays, that we think, oh my goodness, I hope they're not here today. But actually, you know, it's like, oh, great to see you, you know, you're looking really brilliant today, have a big smile on your face. Anybody who's seen the Toy Story will remember the Barbie that always has to have the plastic smile on the face. But I think it's important that, you know, as an NQT, as a trainee, whatever, you need to be positive, and you're putting on an act, really, because that is a big part of teaching. You're putting on that act that you know, during that lesson, you're trying to be as positive as you can to make those students really feel that they want to be in that lesson, that you want them to be there so that you can impart the knowledge that you've trained to do to those students. And you will be exhausted. You will be exhausted after every lesson, and sometimes you don't get a break if you've got 5, 6, some schools have 7 lessons every day, and it really is exhausting. So bearing that in mind, planning your lessons is really important. And one thing I always tell NQTs is to plan the last lesson of the day first, because the last lesson of the day is going to be the most challenging, probably. And if you've planned that, then you know that if you start at the last lesson of the day, plan your lessons then accordingly forward to the first lesson, then at least if your first lesson doesn't get as well planned as you want it to be, then at least you've got the chance that the students are going to be more not as much of a problem. Not every time, but most of the time. As Zoe said, the reward systems, and she's given some great examples in her section there, from when she was an NQT, having a stepped reward system so that you're not going in at the big level with the, you know, with the raffle tickets. Just the smile to a student, just the, oh, you've done so well today. Just that little bit of, like, in the corridor, on the gate, if you see them in the morning or you're leaving school, just that little bit of, like, well, I've said that to that student. Obviously, you're not going to be able to keep a track and say, I've done that with this one, I've done that one, but kind of like all those things, never forget they are part of your reward system. We often forget that when we're actually talking to the students, that is in almost a reward. Just and again, you know your students, you know, I would, some students I would never dream of just tapping them on the shoulder in the class and going, oh, that was a great piece of work. They would like, go, what are you doing, miss? But some students will really rise to the challenge and think, well, you know, miss has actually taken that time to actually acknowledge me in the lesson. And so that also works well. And again, as a head of department in several schools, I had a very tightly sort of stepped reward system, which again, if you would like to look at, I can send you. You know, it went from like text home to postcards to little stickers that they had to, a bit like a card, a lottery card, where you had to scrape off and you had a little prize under there, whether it be house points or whatever. So it's really important to do that. Obviously, Zoe's mentioned about depersonalizing the situation. If you're in a school, you will need to follow the stuff that your school asks you to do. Unless you have a department that is kind of like, it's encouraged to have your own departmental sort of reward system or behaviour management system, then obviously that will depend upon your situation. And again, the word thank you is so important, choosing that correct language that you use with your students, and also the correct place to actually give them a telling off. Or, you know, it might well be that you kind of like go and find them in form time, or you find them at break, or you wait for them on the gate the next morning and you talk to them, whether that be negatively or positively. You will know which is the correct, where the correct place is to give your students that kind of like whatever you need to speak to them about. One thing I always do in my classroom is if a student's chewing, I never stop the lesson and say, right, John, can you come here and put that in the bin? I'll pick up the bin and I'll walk around while I'm in full flow, and the child knows to drop the chewing gum in the bin. Therefore, you're not creating an issue for yourself then. Doesn't work all the time, but it's something to consider. One thing that I've always done, especially with new classes, is the secret student. And how that works is I've put a piece of paper that I've blue tacked underneath a chair. So the class come in, I say to them, right, today there's one student in here who, if they work really well, all the class will get a reward, as in house points or positive comments, whatever your school runs. And nobody knows who that is. And then at the end of the lesson, I say, right, I want you all to stand up and have a look under your seats, and somebody will then find the sticker and they'll say, oh, it's me. So they will get they might get 2 extra points or 1 extra point, but the rest of the class will get that if they have done exactly as I've asked. And you can change that. You can make it different things. You can hide it in different places in the room. You can just do have all your students in a jar with their names on lollipop sticks was fashionable at one bit, and you just pull one student's name out, and that student at the end of the lesson, if they've behaved well, the whole class will get a reward. But the secret student works really, really well. Again, with the body language, as Zoe's mentioned, some techniques for you there, getting down on eye level with students, of actually really when you're writing on the board. I always used to say to my NQTs, when you're writing on the board, never write with your back completely, try and come up with your way of actually having part of your head around, so that then you're writing on the board and you kind of give yourself a bit of neck ache, but at least you know that you can see and you've got your eyes around the students, who you know where the weak spots are in your classroom and the issues, the vulnerable spots. Always follow up any student who gives you any grief in a lesson, so that you know that they know that you mean business, and make sure that your punishment fits the crime. So in other words, don't give a detention of 2 hours to some child who's not done their first homework. I think that's really important. Get parents involved, obviously bringing parents in some of the more challenging schools if it's allowed. I've on a number of occasions I've actually rung parents at work and got them, and they don't like that, and that's quite powerful. Again, that depends on your school, but that was the school policy, and I can't say it enough and reiterate that consistency cannot be stressed strongly enough. So here it is again. So I'm going to move back to you, Zoe, now, for if anybody wants to put any tips in for their new teachers for managing behaviour into there, please feel free to do that. But I think given that we are kind of now on a tight schedule of about 19 minutes left, 18 minutes left, we need to maybe sort of get a scoot on so that we get the rest of the webinar done.
That's right. We've got so many tips to get through.
Excellent. That's great.
Right, so yeah, but please do, as you go on, any tips, I know some of you have been putting them in, please do share as well, because that is all part of it. So the next tick is actually, Elaine, if you'd like to talk a little bit about forming relationships.
Yeah, okay, so as I've always remembered, a lot of these sections actually interlock with each other, but praise is really, really important, because we know that students love to have praise. And if you start on that sort of kind of footing with a student, even if it doesn't carry on, you know, over the year, if you just keep going with the praise and giving them all that positivity, they will, it does eventually, not with every child, but it eventually rubs off on them. Making sure that your students are really they have an environment, you kind of build an environment where the students are not worried to make mistakes, that mistakes are okay to make, because they actually help you to learn, and that helps to breed success. Beginnings of lessons are really important as well, so setting your students something which they can actually do. I know some schools have these all sorts of things that they say, well, you've got to start the lesson with a question, a probing question, and lots of things, but if you have tricky classes and forming relationships, if they get that, I've done something successful and I've done really well, you'll find that that does set the scene for the lesson, really, and then you can go on and start to differentiate your work. The body language is really important as well. So I've seen some very good NQTs sometimes stand at the front with their arms folded, waiting for the class to be quiet. Well, Zoe gave us lots of tips in an earlier session about how you can do that, raising your voice, the 3, 2, 1, the countdown. So there's lots of things that you can do there to actually ensure that your body language does not come across as negative to the students. In terms of also, if you tend to find that you sit at your desk a lot, you almost find that you've got a barrier there in front of you with the students. So consider how that comes across if you're having difficulties with some students. Personal positive comments works for some students, you know, things like, oh gosh, your hair's beautiful today, or oh, you know, you do look smart today. Have you had your hair cut? And you're looking smart this afternoon. I love your nails. I know that might not go down very well in some schools because some students are not allowed to have nail polish on. That's fine. But as I've said at the beginning of the session, anything that you feel you can get your students would find motivating to say to them is really worth having a pop at, is worth giving them a shot. One thing I always do at the beginning of every year is to find out what motivates my students, and the way I get them to do that is I always get them to either draw me, write me, or record me a piece of English, or if they want to do it in the language, if that's possible, to tell me what they like and about themselves. And then what I then do is I then use that to inform my subject content during the year. So I'll give you an example. I had a very truculent boy who loved fishing. Nobody knew this about him except me, I think, and maybe his form tutor. So during the year, I started to drip feed some stuff in about fishing, even if it was just little pictures on the PowerPoint, or we did a text on fishing, just to sort of get that little thing. And I could see his little eyes were looking at me. He was quite a truculent boy in year 10, and I could see his eyes were catching me, thinking, yeah, you've thought about that, you know I like fishing. And then there was a girl who loved Disney, absolutely loved Disney, but she didn't tell anybody she loved it because she thought she was going to be like made fun of. But I sort of started to bring in the Disney characters for when we were doing anything to do with description, for adjectival agreements, something to do with opinions, and it was quite amazing how she suddenly became much more engaged. Doesn't work for everybody, but it's just something there to consider. As Zoe mentioned earlier, observing your other colleagues is really important, and as Zoe said, NQTs and really recently qualified teachers are always a good thing. If you get the opportunity to observe another teacher in your PPA time outside of your own discipline, I would advise that, because you will see the students in different lights. And also, if you, I've recommended to some staff, for example, particularly in primary, if you know that some of your students love another subject, which you might have a little bit of knowledge of, then go and do some team teaching with that subject teacher. So, you know, if it's history something and you're absolutely trying to get them to learn languages, but they love history, go and do a bit of team teaching, and then your students will see you, well, actually this teacher is not just languages, they actually teach other things, and it takes that kind of sting away from the fact that you are teaching the languages. And Zoe's mentioned this as well, about outside the classroom. One of the things we've done in previous jobs with mine is we've had a little bit of a quiz going for a particular year group, could be into form, and we've issued a little bit of a quiz the day before or 2 days before, and we said, right, on the gate when you're coming into school, or on the day when you come in the morning, the teachers are going to ask you some questions, and if you get these right, then we're going to give you a tick, and it's going to go towards some points for your form. And suddenly the students get really interested in doing something that's slightly different in terms of a little bit of relationship building going on. And if you move on to the next slide, Zoe, if you wouldn't mind, these are some examples of stuff that I've done in lockdown with my students. So I know, if you look on Facebook now, everybody's asking, well, what can we do outside of school that is a bit different? Well, I do these in my normal teaching as well, because I've tapped into what students like. We've done, for example, the bottom left, you'll see a child did an actual picture of themselves, they did a sketch, and they've just labelled it in German with the verbs that are to do with that part of the body. We did balancing clowns and butterflies, which some students who were really into science, we did this, we cut it out, we balanced it with the 2 5Ps on the corners with blue tack, and on the back we wrote some language, and we did a display involving that, and that was great. You can see a roll of wallpaper there where the students drew around it and labelled that, and then we've got some concert wristbands where the students wrote some words that they needed to learn, and they wore those for a couple of days, and then a t-shirt there. And just before lockdown started, I sent all my year 11s home with a t-shirt, very cheap, and some washable markers, and they do their work on that. They send me a photograph and it goes into the wash and home, and then they can use it the next time, just a little bit different. And then the paper plate idea on the back is just to write some sort of sentences, and then if you're in a school that doesn't allow cameras or does allow cameras and you want to do something, they could read their script from behind the paper plate if they don't want to be on camera. Okay, Zoe, move on then, please. So what would your tip be? Go on then, I'll move back to you, Zoe.
No worries. I was just going to say we're going to have to shoot through, but
yeah,
I've got some brilliant tips coming in, so please keep them coming because it's really useful. We're going to talk about time management, appropriately enough. Yes. So how to get your time back at weekends. So one of the things is to make sure that you prioritize and diarize. So put your me time, put it in your diary and stick to it. Make sure you have at least one day at a weekend and at least a couple of evenings a week where you will not do any work. And it's really hard to do because it feels like, well, there are far too many things for teachers to do, but ask yourself, will it be the end of the world if I don't do this? Will anybody die? No, they won't. And actually your students will benefit more from a teacher who is happy and rested and has some hobbies outside than they will do from the extra time that you've spent making the slideshows look really pretty or whatever, you know, the extra planning of the lessons. So make sure you do prioritize that. The first few weeks you will absolutely overplan, and frankly the first year. So when you overplan to lessons, because that's totally normal, you will be terrified about running out of things to do and having that sea of faces look at you blankly, or the sea of cameras. So when if you don't use a particular activity, stick it in the next lesson. Make sure you use stuff. Don't start from scratch every time. Got quite a few tips on creating resources. One is, this should be inscribed in stone. Resources should not take longer to make than they will take to be used in your lesson. And we've all done this. I have done this so many times. I spent ages working with, you know, QR codes around the classrooms and so on, and it took me hours, and it took us 30 seconds in the classroom. I know lots of people have been making escape rooms and stuff, which are great for lockdown learning. They're brilliant. But again, if you spend 3 hours making your escape room and your students do it in 5 minutes, that's not right. So see whether you can use other people's resources or team, you know, team up with other teachers to create them, because they are fantastic resources, but make sure you're not putting more time into creation than you are for using them. Related to that is when you're using physical things, so card sorts or tarsiers or whatever, laminate them so you can reuse them. Nothing should be used once only. So if you want to invest a bit of time in making, I had cards with different letters on, for example, so that students could, you know, rearrange into do anagrams or make words, then great, laminate them, sort them, put that time in so that you can use them again and you don't have to do that. If you're doing if you have digital resources, sort of PowerPoints and things, don't put dates on them so that you can reuse them. Everything should be able to be used more than once. Think of this in a kind of eco way. You should be able to use everything multiple times, and organize it. Have some kind of system, label it. Don't label it according to the class, but label it according to the year group and sort of subject, or maybe term or something. But if you label it according to the class, you won't necessarily find it for next year. So always thinking ahead, can I use this again? You will, over the years, gather lots of different activity ideas, so keep them somewhere. This could be, I actually had a filing system. It was a handwritten one with, they were all sorted out to by skill and sort of pair work and individual work and group work and so on. So that when I wanted to plan a lesson, that kind of made it much quicker, because then I could go, right, I need a listening activity and I think I want something that's a kind of pair work one, right, that'll do. So you're not always having to come up with ideas each time. Even better if you've got a PowerPoint with the templates on for different tasks, your treasure hunt task or various different things you might have, then that way if you're putting together PowerPoints or notepads or whatever you're using, you can just then copy that and stick the content in each time. So try to do it so that you speed up the creation process later on. A quick thing that you can see here on the slide, we've got Lexibar. So this is great for accents if you're creating text and so on. It's a really quick download. It's free, and then they have it for French, German, Spanish, and when you click on the letter with the accents in, it imports it to wherever you were typing with the correct font and formatting, which is wonderful. So Lexibar, definitely recommend. And also, if you get a chance, learn the keyboard accent shortcuts. I still know them for French and German. I still use them now, so that's really, really helpful. Just saves you some time. It's worth putting that time in. Engage help. So if you are doing card sorts or anything that involves cutting up things, which I think definitely newer teachers like to use a lot of, more sort of physical activities, then don't spend your time cutting them out and sorting them. Tutor groups love jobs, so get them to do that grunt work of cutting things up, because they really like being helpful. Or if you've got students in detention, you can use those as well. So yeah, enlist help. Don't spend your time on the more menial stuff. And related to that, use digital resources as much as you can to ease the marking load. So we have it in Language Nut. We have whole range of vocab activities and all 4 key skills. We have exam skill activities, so reading and listening comprehension, open speaking and writing. And with things like grammar activities, which we also have, and vocab and sort of, you know, gap fills, multiple choice, things like that, anything which has a closed answer, if a computer can mark it, so much the better. There is no point in you spending your time doing tick and flick marking, you know, true or false questions, or things where it was, you know, sorting A, B, C, whatever. If you can get a computer to do it, so LanguageNet is one system which you could use. There are obviously plenty of others as well. I'm sure people have some tips as well. So use digital things for closed questions where possible, so that you can get all that drilling in without having to mark it yourself. And where you are marking, obviously I know that not all schools are allowing marking your books at the moment, but if you are doing that, then consider using a marking code. So this is an example at the bottom there, where in most classes there will be about 5 or 6 of the same mistakes that get made over and over again. So if you have a system, we had even what went well, even better if, and then a kind of task. Rather than repeat yourself and write the same thing out in every book, I would have a slide which had the main things that were coming up, and then in the book I would just write the code, the number or the letter or whatever it is, and then in our dirt time, which we had, it's what we called, so at the beginning of the lesson, students would look back and respond to any marking in their book. They would write out the feedback and do the task, which again would be on the board, so saving myself, and that massively cut my marking time down. And you can do that remotely as well. You can just, you know, if you've got them there, you can copy and paste, which is really nice, so not having to write that out each time. Okay, Elaine, I'm going to pass over to you really quickly.
Yeah, I think so. So obviously I've mentioned about using your PPA time wisely. Try to use that for organising your teaching file and dedicate that weekly rather than just leaving it all to the end of each half term, because then it becomes unwieldy. It's much easier to get it done little and often is better than lots in one go. So he said using, if you can co-plan with your colleagues or other NQTs that you know in your subject, in languages, Magpie resources from loads of places. You're not stealing it, you're actually taking inspiration from someone else's resource and making it your own, putting your own twist on it. We talk about languages at the bottom. We've got here a couple of examples of the same text. You spend lots of time making your resources, exploit each one to the full. You know, can you do some oral chanting? Can you do some sentence stealing? Can you do some quiz trading? Can you look for do some paired reading with your students, so that one reads one sentence, another reads another? Can they look for the verbs? Can they look for the tenses? Can they say am on a V and then put something else after it? Lots of different ways, and that way your students will benefit from just the one resource rather than having 40 slides of a PowerPoint which take you forever to do. Obviously, Zoe mentioned about students demonstrating their progress. You need to be mindful of that, and she's mentioned the ways of getting your students to mark each other's work, or using online material for that to try and get down the amount of marking you're having to do. And I can't stress enough, with your teaching standards portfolio, professional portfolio, whatever you want to call it, it's all about the quality, not the quantity that's in there. So make sure that you're using, you know, the one piece of evidence that could go over a couple of standards to make sure that you're not making this file too long and too wieldy. Okay, Zoe, move on. Thank you. So again, over to you, Zoe.
Oh, sure. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to be really quick. I think we'll probably have to make this the last one, I'm afraid. So many tips to go through. But so just last tips on getting through this year and remaining healthy. So lots of people think that they feel they're really underprepared because last year in their PGC or training year they weren't in the classroom, and now you're not in the classroom for your NQT year. Actually, you are the most prepared cohort of NQTs that have ever been, because you have dealt with so many challenges and you've absolutely hit the ground running. So do not consider yourself underprepared. Consider yourself of having had so many experiences in such a short time. So don't worry about it, and remind yourself why you do this job. So I had a nice jar, and I put in that every time something nice happened, a lovely light bulb moment in a lesson, a positive comment from someone, a really nice connection with a student, anything that happens, somebody saying thank you, I put it on a little piece of paper and put it in a jar. And on the rubbish days, because there will be rubbish days, I would look through them and I would remind myself, I'm not a terrible teacher. I actually can do this job. So I definitely would advise that. And also positive phone calls. So if you have to make a negative phone call afterwards to a parent, then afterwards pick a student who is doing quite well this week or has done a really good piece of work and call their parents. It will make you feel better, it will make them feel better, it will really help your relationship. And bonus points if it could be a student who you've had to make a negative phone call for in the past, because that connects you and the parents realise that you're not this grumpy old dragon who hates their child. You actually do care about their learning, and it's a really wonderful thing. It takes an extra 5 minutes, but the improvement to your move, I can't stress enough. There are various things as well, so you can see on here. Last thing I want to talk about is don't go to school when you're ill. Obviously this is very appropriate at the moment anyway if you are teaching in school, but this is advice which is useful even when there isn't a pandemic, because I know it's really hard to try to do to come up with cover work and things when you're feeling ill and so on, but it is not worth it. You will go to school, you'll be ill for longer, you will not teach as well as you can normally because you'll be feeling rubbish. You will have a confrontation with a child or something will go wrong, you'll have to follow up, you will create more work for yourself. So find a system that you can use for setting cover work. That's something we have on LanguageNet. We have when we were designing how to set assignments and things which can be used for cover. My criteria that I set for the developers is that you must be able to do this with a migraine. So it must be that quick. So find whatever system that you have for setting cover work, get that prepared ready so that you can quickly sort through it and do that, and then make sure that you don't go to school ill. I think we're going to have to finish there, unfortunately. I know that Elaine had some lovely bits as well. I'm just going to put it up there for a second, so when you're reading, if you're watching the video.
A couple of things. One thing is, remember, anything that doesn't go well is just a moment in time. Don't beat yourself up about it. It's just a passing moment in time. And just here, I've put the ALL languages that always meet every Friday of the first Friday in the month. You can have a webinar there. I've put that there. And these secondary NQT help and the two up here are all Facebook groups, particularly for NQTs and trainee teachers and recently qualified. Okay, so.
Brilliant. So yeah, so thanks very much for coming to our webinar today. We have a bunch more, so please do check those out. We would love to hear your feedback, so please put feedback in the comments, or feel free to email us. So there's Elaine and I at LanguageNet, and that's also our colleague Dan if you're interested in getting a free trial or a demo or something like that. If you are a LanguageNet subscriber and you'd like to find out more about using a secondary product, that's next week. But whether you're a LanguageNet subscriber or not, everybody's welcome to join in any of our webinars, and particularly the rest of the MFL SOS series. So thank you so much. Sorry we had to whiz through, we have loads and loads of tips, but please, yeah, good luck for the rest of this year. Thanks for coming, and please do get in touch if there's any questions or anything we can help you with.
Thank you.
Thank you.